Star Wars. You say Star Wars.
Everybody has an opinion.
The War with the Stars there. Yes, absolutely. So, I mean, we have already discussed a little bit of our origin stories. And for me, definitely, it was the moment, like, I know that there was a time where this is geeky to say this, and I don't know if it's cool now or still geeky, but, like, as a 3-year-old, I went into a cinema, and the trajectory of my life completely changed. Without exaggeration, Wyatt and I would not be talking, Gayle and I would not know each other or be talking, and this podcast would have never happened if it wasn't for the influence that Star Wars had in my life to pursue filmmaking, to pursue media arts, cinematography, special effects, things that I've spent my whole life training and understanding and learning about. So, I mean, it is kind of the foundational moment where I went, don't know what that is as a 3-year-old, but I want to be involved in it because I saw, even at a young age, the effect it was having not just on me, but on everyone around them.
Right.
So as a 14, 15-year-old, did you feel the same way? Like, was that the path?
I was 13 when Star Wars came out. I had turned 13 in May 15th, and then Star Wars was released May 25th of that same year. And I think that's it. I can't imagine another film in history that had that sort of overarching cultural impact. But you sort of touched on it, Gil, in that, yes, it was a cool film. Yes, it was a lot of fun to watch. Yes, we none of us had ever seen anything like that before. But I think the fact that it just immediately cut across all lines. Like, it wasn't just for film fans or science fiction fans. It was, kids liked it, adults liked it, older people liked it, science fiction fans liked it, fantasy fans liked it, action adventure fans liked it. It was funny. I mean, everybody liked it. The film cut across such a broad swath of cultures all around the world. I mean, there was really, maybe The Wizard of Oz, maybe...
That's what I was thinking. The Wizard of Oz probably...
Maybe there was a religious film here or there, but, I can't
The
think
Ten
of another
Commandments,
film.
I was thinking, maybe The Ten Commandments being a film that, like, a lot of people went to, and everyone was like, I saw this when at this point, and it explained certain things. And Star Wars, and we were talking about the first one. I mean, I know they call it A New Hope, but to me, it'll always be Star Wars.
Yeah. I'm with you on that.
Yeah. When you say Star Wars,
100%.
that's what I hear.
Yes.
That's what I hear. Yeah.
Yep.
So that 1977 release film, like, also created the industry in a way or reformatted the industry that was kind of, it wasn't tanking, but it wasn't the powerhouse it was in the 50s and 60s.
Right.
So, especially with the 70s, you had a whole bunch of new directors, very influenced by what was going on in Europe. The new wave, a kind of auteur, it was coming out, and Hollywood didn't know how to kind of deal with that. And then you have George Lucas, who was an independent film director who was working in the system, but really was working more on the idea of, a small crew away from the big structure. And then this film hits, and Hollywood not only takes notice, but it starts putting into place certain things that still work today. The what they call the tentpole movie, the event movie of summer, was created with the success of Star Wars. Merchandising, which has been discussed so much, which was such a throwaway, right? If you make a deal now, there is no way that you get a piece of merchandising. Because it is so lucrative. We're living in a time where you can't go and buy. I think just before Star Wars, you can't buy merchandise. I think Kenner had a big hit with the $6 Million Man, which was a 12-inch doll that kids could play and recreate the adventures. Yeah. And what? I never had one of those, but I'm just trying to track one down. I want a Maskatron, especially after COVID. It's like, if we all got to wear masks, I want a Maskatron. And Kenner kind of had some success in that, but marketing, when it came to tie-ins with films, started, the modern day era definitely started with Star Wars. And then this idea of, advertising through word of mouth, the idea of keeping a film in the theaters for a year and then re-releasing it. And then how do we extend that success? Again, sequels were not really prevalent in the system. You told a story. The story was done. You went and you did something else.
I was 10 when it came out, but I remember as a 10-year-old girl even knowing that this was episode 4 of a 9-episode arc. That was something that I don't even know where I would have heard it, you know?
That's a really interesting one, because if you go back and you do a little research, when Star Wars first opened, there was no episode 4. In fact, when it was first released, there is in the original crawl, right? And again, Lucas was playing with the idea of those flashbacks. He wanted to make a Flash Gordon film. He wanted to make a serial where every moment something exciting happened, and then, and that's the formula not just in Star Wars, but also very much in Indiana Jones. Yeah, like that action, like every 10 minutes there's a beat where something dynamic happens. It's actually when Star Wars after Star Wars is actually opens and they start getting some momentum behind them, they've got to cut new prints, and somewhere in there Lucas goes, let's call this episode 4, because it ties in with the idea of the serials and it opens a door. Now I don't know if he thought about it as an open a door, but I know that in that first run there was no crawl, and then when they had to strike new prints, they quickly went, let's reshoot this, let's put in an episode 4. And
was
then
there no crawl?
Oh no, I think he misspoke himself.
Oh, there was no number 4 on
There was
the
no
crawl.
number 4.
Okay.
There was no number 4, A New Hope. Yeah, that came along
later. And I might be wrong here, but I'm just going by memory. I think there was like an episode 4, and then later on another re-release where they pushed it back out. They called it A New Hope. So
I think A New Hope and episode 4 were done at the same time. We'd have to research that and find that out.
But am I wrong though? But when I was 10, when the movie came out, and whatever magazines me and my brothers were getting our hands on that was talking about it, we knew at that time, even before any re-releases,
it's true.
That it was episode 4 of a 9-story arc. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, I'll go in later into my rant about George Lucas and his ever-evolving story of what was what. Was it 12? Was it 9? Was it, was it the adventures?
I want to know who the Wills is.
Yeah, exactly.
These stories are supposed to be the journey of the Wills, and I'm like, who are the Wills?
When it was 12 episodes, it was the Journal of the Wills, and I'm like, and then it became like the adventures of Starkiller, and then it became Luke Skywalker, and it's just so
and
many.
And then Han Solo became a much more more interesting character, so they moved it away from the adventures of Luke Skywalker. I mean, I have novels here, Splinter the Mind's Eye, which was released after Star Wars, but the original Star Wars novel was released before the movie came out, and they all have from the adventures of Luke Skywalker, and you're like, really? This is Luke's the main character. All right,
that's funny cool. Because when you see episodes 1, 2, and 3, and 7, 8, and 9. It's not really his story, and that just like I said, we can talk about Lucas and his ever evolving, his ever evolving attitude.
That episode 9 doesn't even make it a Skywalker story at all. Like, forget that we just concentrated 3 movies on Anakin, who turns into Darth Vader, and then his son. Then it becomes a Palpatine story, and I'm like, his granddaughter just stole everything. What?
And I want to go back into the actual details of Star Wars: A New Hope itself, but I can only imagine. I have a lot of criticism for George Lucas because I feel like he wasn't good about just admitting to changes and admitting to mistakes. It's like the whole Revenge of the Jedi concept, where they released, was it a trailer and a poster that said Revenge, and then somebody somewhere along the line said, wait a minute, I thought you said Revenge is not the Jedi way. Jedi don't seek revenge. Yes. That's bad. So then, oh shit, that's right. And then let's change it to Return of the Jedi. But then, rather than just going, oh yeah, I screwed that up, Lucas went, oh no, that was always part of it. It was a mislead. We intended to do that. And it's like, that's where, I think if he had just, when there were changes, and if he had just admitted, I think I would have a lot more respect for him at this point. It's just, he's rewritten Star Wars and the whole saga so many times with new rules, and then he's always got an excuse as to, well, that was always the plan. And I'm like,
right.
I'm sorry. You released this film called Star Wars. You struggled to get this thing made. You just about killed yourself in the process. It wasn't the film you wanted to make. You barely got it done. And it was the most successful thing the planet had ever seen. And then I can't imagine the pressure. So even though I'm critical of the prequels and I'm critical of the way a lot of this went, just from his point of view, I can't imagine the pressure, the fans. I mean, he's clearly got a love-hate relationship with the fans where, you know, for years they kept him aloft and paid his rent, and then they turned on him and basically started bagging on him. And I'm one of them. I'm one of them who got irritated with the directions he went in. So, yeah, it's like, here, I've given you this toy box to play in, and now you're bashing me for it. You know, and I still think he got the last laugh in selling out the whole thing for $4 billion.
And good on him. I don't know about you, but I was like cheering. I'm like, you know what? I know you don't like the Hollywood system, and that's cool, but you ended up being a board member of the biggest Hollywood structure on the planet. Yes. And you know what? 4.2 billion went to Lucas. It wasn't, no one had shares in it. I mean, I hope that he actually has the ability to go and make those films that he keeps talking about, these very personal films, because it'd be great to hear his voice again, like the original THX 1138 student film. And
I'd actually rather see more stuff like that. Yeah, get out of Star Wars, 100%. George. Just move on from Star Wars. Do something else. I would like to see that because I'm a big fan of like American Graffiti. Yes. I want to see where he'd go with more. Because I've always said I don't know that Lucas is the strongest visual stylist, but he does have a knack for creating these characters and developing these circumstances to put them in. Because American Graffiti is nothing if not this essay on characters, and he just kind of cooked up all these characters and went and mushed them together, and then you saw the sparks fly.
Did he cook it up, or was he? One of the things that I've noticed is that he's very good at reading kind of the room when it comes to popular culture. And for American Graffiti, that was his youth. I mean, he was very much part of the car culture, and he was again. This is something that he was talking about with authority because he had experience with it, and I feel a little bit in the same way with the original Star Wars. Was that he loved science fiction, he loved the Buck Rogers, Flash Gordon type serials. He was reading pulp science fiction novels. He wasn't a stranger to it. He didn't just pull this all out of the air. I mean, this was something that he, if you're going to make a film, you as a filmmaker, you always want to make a film that you're passionate about. You don't want to go and make a film that it's like, the minute you hit the first hurdle, it's like, you know what, I didn't care about this anyway, let's go. And drop the project. And a film like this, he had interests in how do we do the visual effects? These special effects departments don't exist anymore. Can we start using things? Well, I don't know if a lot of people know, but the cameras that we use to do the visual effects, the VistaVision butterfly kind of cameras that did all the photography for the models, the last film that they shot for was the Ten Commandments.
Right.
And then goes 30 years between the Ten Commandments and then Star Wars. And in fact, Lucas ended up buying those cameras, and there's a plaque with every film that it's shot, and there's a 30-year gap between Ten Commandments and Star Wars. So, this was an old art, and again, it's kind of amazing that they got college dropouts, university students who wanted to, who were kind of interested in this. They put them all in a factory down in Van Nuys. Which was one of my first pilgrimages when I went to Los Angeles. I'm going and taking photos outside this warehouse that I think now creates fiberglass spa baths or something. I knocked on the door and they're like, "Oh, another Star Wars guy." And I'm like, "No, I'm from Australia." And they're like, "Yeah, whatever. Just take photos and get out of here." But it's just one of those kind of really interesting things that everything had to be done by scratch. If you're going to make a film, there's a lot easier to go and make, let's say, Love Story, which won the Academy that year against Star Wars, than it is to go and create an environment.
It was Annie Hall. It was Annie Hall that won.
Annie Hall, sorry. Annie Hall. Okay, you're right. I think Love Story won something,
I think that was a couple years earlier. I think it was a couple years earlier.
Okay.
I think so.
That's cool. I'll stand correct. I got to be honest with you, I haven't seen either. But...
Hey everyone, this is Wyatt Weed from the Cinematic Perspective podcast. My wife, Gayle, created a website called IMarriedTheBoar.com because, well, she married the boar predator from Predator 2.
In my time in Los Angeles, I had a few fun acting jobs, one of which was playing the boar predator in the end scene of Predator 2. I also had a nice little featured bit in a third season episode of Star Trek The Next Generation called The High Ground. You can go to imarriedtheboar.com and find autographed pictures, action figures, our movies on DVD, and other fun merchandise.
You know, it's a lot easier to go and shoot in the real world and create these sets, create these environments, create these techniques to actually envisage what you're telling the story. So in my book, there's no question that Lucas was invested emotionally and wanted to make something along these lines.
Right.
And then again, you know, he openly says this was supposed to be a kids' film. This was, you know, princesses and pirates, and you know, I have a really good friend who likes Star Wars a lot, and I said, you do know that it's a Western? And he's like, no, it's not. It's a science fiction film. I'm like, yeah, but if you look at it, like, Luke's on a farmstead. And he's like, yeah, you're right. And then he goes off on a journey. He's like, oh, and then he meets a knight, but if in a Western, that's, you know, the gunslinger, and who's going to mentor him. And he's like, oh my God, I never saw that before. I go, that's the beauty of it. It's the same. You on a subconscious level, you watch the film and you know all of these things, but they've just been mixed up with these really amazing ideas and concepts. The droids are the narrators of the story. Like, we are the droids. That's why they're the first characters that we're introduced to. I mean, again, we'll shift it. C-3PO is having a conversation with R2. We don't understand R2's conversation because we don't speak in beeps and squeaks, right? But with understanding the relationship, and that is never developed in the movie. We are dropped right in the middle of it.
Right.
C-3PO's on that rebel blockade runner and turns to R2 and goes, we're in trouble. And like, we're off. Like, they're not like, okay, this is the relationship with this guy. And no, because we already know that. We've already been introduced to that trope. We already understand that relationship. And when you go through, and this is something that I've had a huge arguments with people. If you look at Star Wars Empire and Return of the Jedi, every character stays the same emotionally except one. I'm going to ask you guys, who do you think actually evolves throughout the story?
I would say it's Han.
And it is. I agree 100%. Because when we meet Han, he's all out there for himself. You know, I'm in it for the money. Pay me and I'll come along, and then I'm just going to go off and do the rest of it. And by the end of Return, he's like, count me in, you're my family. The joke is that Luke keeps owing him. And then he's like, okay, now we're even. But it's already, he's already evolved. He's involved with Leia. But if you look at Luke's character at the start, he's already the hero. He's destined to be the Jedi that he's going to be. He has no choice. It's kind of interesting that Mark Hamill wanted a very dark version of Luke in Return of the Jedi with an eye patch and wearing black, like he's just been beaten up in the time we've seen him between Empire and Return. And of course, Lucas is like, no, we can't do that. The princess is still on her mission of, freeing the galaxy. And in fact, that even goes on into the new films when they reintroduced. The droids are the same. Darth Vader, I know there's an argument that Darth Vader is redeemed, but he's still that kind of fulcrum towards tyranny in the universe. Ben and Yoda are still the teachers. They don't evolve, but Han is really the character that goes through this whole arc. Sometimes wonder if Harrison Ford pushed that a little bit.
Well, someday we're going to talk about the connections you and I both have to Mark Hamill. And there are some stories there about Harrison Ford. But let me say this. As an actor, you can protect your character, and you're not really there to protect everybody else's character, and you're not there to make everybody else look good. And you're not even necessarily being egotistical if you're trying to make your character work. The question then is the director allowing you to do that? Are the other actors allowing you to do that? So if Harrison Ford had the foresight to invest in and be particular about the path of his character, and everybody else just kind of stood around and went, yeah, Harrison's always worried about his own character. Well, that's not Harrison's fault. If you know,
No.
if you think Harrison's character is getting too much attention and is doing things, that's Harrison doing Harrison's work, and you can either argue that or debate it or make your own character do something, or you can sit down with George Lucas and you can say, okay, George, you know, let's work some stuff out here. But yeah, I've heard some things on the inside about where Harrison went with characters and how he pursued them, and yeah, we'll discuss that another time.
Yeah, we'll definitely do that another time. But going back to the original Star Wars, I mean, and also, I guess I don't know how much people who are listening to this know the background of it, but Carrie Fisher was 19, Mark Hamill was 21. Right. And then the adult of that ensemble was Harrison Ford, who was in his 30s.
Yeah,
so he
like
came to it with some authority. Yeah. Some authority, right?
Well,
and
it's funny,
like,
on a set with Peter Cushing and Alec Guinness, they still looked at Harrison Ford and went, okay, he's the experienced guy. He's the seasoned actor, which he really, honestly, wasn't that well known. But, I mean, he'd done television. He'd done movies already. He'd gotten to a point, he was so experienced and so kind of done at that point that he said, okay, I don't want to take crap parts anymore, and I don't want to do stuff that I don't want to do. I'm going to go do carpentry. And I'll read for parts and I'll audition for stuff, but in the meantime, I'm going to go do carpentry, and yeah, I'm done with this acting thing until it starts to look good. So yeah, he was sort of the old experienced hand at that, even on that set with some of those classic actors. So they were all looking up to Harrison, yeah.
When you think about it as well, like this ensemble, out of the ensemble cast, you know, Mark, Kerry would be around Harrison a hell of a lot more than Peter Cushing, which Kerry only had one scene and the others didn't.
Right.
And then there's a story that like Mark Hamill was so excited about working with Alec Guinness that at one point he gave him money to leave him alone. Like he gave him £5 and said, just leave me alone. Like, you know. And of course that's the enthusiasm because Mark is, you know, a huge, you know, geek in his own right. You know, and I think he tells the story all the time. Is like he was just like I overwhelmed him and he's trying to concentrate and he's like, you know, go get yourself an ice cream or something. Just leave me alone. So, you know, I guess Harrison kind of was able to kind of have a bit of a not power play, but you know, he realized the role. And from what I understand, there was a lot of cues. George Lucas isn't a very vocal director. The joke is he has two things that he says to actors all the time, which is faster and more intense, right?
When he lost his voice, they were going to give him signs, and one said faster, and one said more intense, and then he would have been able to just sit in his chair and raise the signs. Yeah.
And there's a television special called The Making of Star Wars, where you know, they're filming behind the scenes, and it's the scene where our heroes are running towards the Falcon that's on the Death Star, and they realize that Obi-Wan and Darth Vader are in a duel, and they're running past the camera. And of course, I'm sure the actors knew that there was a camera there doing behind the scenes footage because they're playing it up. And you hear cut, and Harrison Ford just goes, and then, you know, Mark just jumps in and goes, and then Kerry's like, and they're like, and then you hear like George go, we'll do it again. The mic was in picture. And then Harrison's like, the mic was in picture. We're going to do it again. Yeah. And yeah, they're all like, of course, we're going to do it again. They're hamming it up. But you can also see that the relationship was, we know we're going to do this again, and we know we're going to have to do it faster, and that's just basically what's going on, and it's a kind of fun.
That scene in the behind the scenes, the making of, is well, not that scene, but the behind the scenes stuff in the making of Star Wars is why I wanted to become an actor. Seeing them behind the scenes on the set and having the fun that they were having, it just something connected with me, because way back when, you know, for all those whippersnappers out there, you couldn't just pull up the making of Star Wars online or stream it or pull it out of the DVD set. It aired once on network television back in the fall of 1977, and then in like 1980, I think shortly before Empire Strikes Back came out, a local university had like a movie room where they'd get like 16 millimeter prints of stuff, and then they would advertise what they were going to be screening, and it was all free admission. So I'm looking through the newspaper, and it's like, you know, Friday afternoon, the making of Star Wars. And then they repeated it again on like Monday afternoon. So I could drive over to the local movie theater or the local university and see this 16 millimeter print of the making of Star Wars. And I liked it so much because I'd only seen it once 3 years earlier.
Sure.
And I liked it so much, I went back like the following Monday and watched it again. So, which I just want to take a moment and emphasize to the younger people in the audience, we're all about attention. Because attention is not the thing these days. But man, when something was on network television once, and you knew it was only going to be on network television once, you sat your ass down and you focused. And people would try to talk to you, and you'd be like, shut up, I'm watching Making of Star Wars. And then, same thing, I had to go and see those screenings, and I had to be there early, and I had to be focused, and I had to have gone to the bathroom, and I'm ready to watch, because for the next hour, I'm watching the making of Star Wars, and I'm only going to get this one chance. And then, thankfully, I got to see it again the following Monday.
You know, there was something, I'm going to interrupt to completely sidetrack us for a minute, but there was something about that, though, that is totally missing today. So, like, I knew that if you wanted to watch Wizard of Oz, it was Thanksgiving weekend or whatever it was that you were only going to get to ever see once a year.
Right.
And that became a special event.
Right.
Where now the fact that everybody's got all of the Christmas cartoons on DVD or streaming and you can watch it whenever.
Yeah. And it's kind of cool because you have the access to it. Like, no one can ever take those things away from me now because I own them. But by the same token, they've lost a specialness. They've lost a certain quality where it's like, oh my God, Wizard of Oz is going to be on tonight at 7 o'clock. And the whole
Get
family,
the popcorn.
The whole family raced in and sat down because you had to be there when the opening titles started. And, you know, and then you couldn't just turn it off. It was like, no, I have to watch this movie right now in sequence from 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock. I couldn't go, you know, I'm
tired. I'll watch the rest tomorrow.
You know, oh, you want to go do this now? Okay, I'll pause this. I'll come back to it later. You know, Netflix will hold my spot for me. Yeah.
What was your
that's a really interesting point because I've been listening to a lot of podcasts about filmmakers and artists and actors from the, you know, who grew up in the 60s and 70s. And a lot of the New York crew kept referring to a thing called the $1 Million Movie, which was played in New York. So they'd play the movie on a Sunday, and then they'd play it again on the Monday, Tuesday, during the day. And like as children, they would kind of rush home and watch the same movie 5 times. So they got to play. And again, that focus of like, what did I miss last time? What can I see again? And it's just really interesting that you know, how many actors or directors are like, you grew up in New York. Did you watch the $1 Million Movie? Oh, religiously. Like that whole week, it was, you know, you'd wait to see what was being played on Sunday night, and then you knew you had 5 screenings to catch it, and you caught every single one. So I think that's really interesting. I was a little bit more spoiled than you were, Wyatt, because by the time Star Wars was played for the very first time here in Australia, and it was a big deal, General Electric actually sponsored it and would send you out like movie posters. It was a huge big deal. My parents, and I'm not sure why, but they decided they wanted to buy a video recorder. So we had a Betamax video recorder, and I remember sitting there with a remote control, which was just a pause button, and it came on. It was a Sunday night. My parents allowed me to stay up late because this was a big event. I must have been 6 or 7, and I actually paused all the commercials out, so I had the whole film. And then the next day, they played the making of Star Wars 7:30, and I put it at the end of that recording.
Wow.
So I had access not only to the movie, but to the making of. And my mother tells me that I watched that tape like ad nauseum so many times that she would walk into the room and I'd be reciting the lines before the actors would say it. Which is, again, something that was really weird. You didn't have access to be able to do that. And as I got older, I actually learned to be able to memorize lines on first-run films. So I'd go and see films with friends of mine, and then I'd come out, and in my mind, I'm recreating the scene, but I'm verbalizing the dialogue. My friends used to say to me all the time, Gil, we just saw the movie, we don't need to hear it again. So, right? And I'm like, thanks, guys. But I was like, it wasn't just entertainment for me. I was trying to break down how they structured the scene and you know, where they put the camera, and a way of me being able to
You're
get access to
reliving the
that before
excitement.
the making of Star Wars, and especially SPFX. The Making of Empire Strikes Back has an incredibly special place in my heart. So and again, we talk about parallels all the time. The more we speak, the more we realize that spiritually, we're definitely brothers, if not something else. But my inspiration to become a cinematographer and to delve into special effects was my passion of rewatching over and over again SPFX, The Making of Empire Strikes Back. It played before Empire was coming to Australia. It had scenes from the film. Years later, when the internet, is what it is today, I actually even tracked down some of the short student films. And one of the guys, Mark Sisson, is it Mark Sisson? I think it is. No, it's not Mark Sisson. Mark Sisson's a guy from England who makes models from Space 1999. But there's another guy. He ended up becoming an ILMer. He had a student film in there. I was able to get. He's the guy who did High Rise. We spoke about it.
Oh, right. Mark Sullivan.
Excuse me. So Mark Sullivan, as a student, had films that were showcased in SPFX, The Making of Empire Strikes Back. We had a conversation. He sent me copies of his films to look that I had, as a child, was seeing just a couple of seconds of and going, huh? Why aren't I doing that? Like, what? And just recently, someone sent me a copy of that making of from Empire Strikes Back that's on YouTube, and I immediately sat down and watched it maybe 6 or 7 times, and literally emotionally went back to the space that I was when I was a child, watching it for the first time. And I'm just like, oh, okay. I'm having conversations with my partner, and I'm like, I gotta go make movies again. And she's like, really? You're doing all this? And I'm like, no, just for me. I gotta do a George Lucas, just very personal film. But it's just amazing how, for you, your pathway into acting became, this experience you had with the making of Star Wars. And for me, it was just a little bit later, 3 years, and it's The Making of Empire Strikes Back. And I'm like, that's what I want to do. I want to shoot models that look realistic and can create an environment where people go on an emotional journey.
And it's interesting because my twisted pathway, which we probably have talked about, is that I started making films because of Star Wars. And I always wanted to be a filmmaker, but I specifically wanted to be an actor. And then I rationalized that I would act my way into directing. But that's a whole nother story. So upon seeing Star Wars for the first time, I remember, all you got was trailers. You got an occasional article in a magazine, like Star Wars would run a little blurb, or some magazine would run a little blurb. You didn't have round-the-clock media bombardment. We were all just scratching our heads and going, this Star Wars thing, this looks kind of cool. What the hell is this Star Wars thing? And I remember seeing it for the first time. I didn't see it on opening day. I saw it the second day. I saw it on a Saturday, like the noon screening, like the first matinee. Packed house. And of course, the Star Destroyer goes overhead, the music's roaring, and it's a jaw dropper. It's astonishing. And we've talked about, the availability of media now, but back then it was like you saw it in the theater. And I don't know if young people realize how much the dynamics of film and film economics have changed, because back then films were cheaper to make. I mean, inflation and all, but just back then, what were there, 20, 30 people working at Industrial Light and Magic tops?
Yeah.
The whole credits on Star Wars ran by in just a few minutes. It wasn't 10 minutes of credits with thousands of names and multiple columns. It was a handful of guys, and the ILM crew was pretty small. And
I don't even think they were called ILM at the time. They were just the visual effects crew.
You're right. I'm not sure. Yeah.
The Star Wars visual effects crew.
So it wasn't a huge crew. The film might have been expensive by the standards of today, but even adjusted for inflation, things have gotten ridiculously more expensive. But for me to see that film more, I had to go back to the theater. And it was at a time where, the movie ran 6 months in my hometown, which was just astonishing. 6 months in a theater. What the hell? And then in St. Louis, where I moved later, I found out Star Wars, because they re-released it the following year. They re-released it in 1978. Yes. Some theaters in St. Louis had never stopped playing it. It just expanded again to more theaters, but this one theater played it for 18 months straight. Well, that was good for everybody, because then the movie theater was continuing to take half the profits and sending half the profits to the studio. It was incredibly lucrative for everybody. Everybody benefited. But if you wanted to see the movie again, you had to go back and pay to see it again. So I remember I saw Jaws like 3 times, and people thought I was insane. Oh my God, you saw a movie 3 times? I'm like, well, yeah, there was cool things. I wanted to see it again. Star Wars, I think I saw 3 times the first year, like 4 times on the re-release, and then like 6 times on the 1979 re-release. And it was just this incremental thing.
You were that guy?
I was that guy. Well, compared to people who've
Actually,
seen it
you were
literally...
tame.
Hundreds.
I was
Yeah.
tame. I was tame. So I remember one day I was so... I think it was when it was re-released in 1979, and I knew Empire was coming. And I had to get it out of my system. Like, I knew I needed to see Star Wars again, because I hadn't seen it since the previous summer. So when it was coming to this theater in Urbana, where I was living at the time, I thought, there's going to be 4 screenings that day. I'm going to just pay for the first screening, and I'm going to stay there all day, and I'm going to watch the whole damn film 4 times in a row, because that's how many times it's going to screen, and that'll get it out of my system. And that day was actually a day where, like, first screening, yay, I saw Star Wars again. Second screening, cool, I saw Star Wars. Third screening, okay, all right. Well, there's a point where this picks up again. Okay, cool. We're picked with. So by the time I got to the 4th screening, I was like, this is kind of a chore. I'm not really sure that this was a smart thing to do, but it sure did. It satisfied me. And I went home that day going, okay, I think I can live until The Empire Strikes Back came out.
So it's an interesting thing because again, I was too young. My parents did take me a couple of times to see Star Wars because they were so kind of into it, and it was everywhere. But recently, I spoke to a Mary Jo Duffy, who was a writer for the Marvel Star Wars comic book. This is the original series that was launched in the 70s. Right. And when we were talking about the background, she told me that she went to see it with her brother because her brother was a big science fiction fan and loved the movie so much that every Friday night, instead of going out on a date, she would go and see Star Wars. And that was like, she was just enamored by the Obi-Wan character. And, it was like, cool, Friday night, my night out is going and seeing this movie. And I was like, you know what? That's something that I kind of wish I could have been involved in. Here in Melbourne, we have a 24-hour science fiction movie marathon. And it's probably the closest thing that I can kind of get the same idea of is that I see certain people every time there. So we turn up at 6 a.m. and we go to 6 a.m. the next night. And I never see them in the real world, but it's like, hey, how you doing? And it's like, cool. And it's like, hey, Dune's going to be on, or, we're going to watch The Abyss for the umpteenth time because they always play that damn movie. So, cool, I'll sleep in it and then I'll wake up and I haven't missed anything. And in fact, the last time that I got to see Star Wars in the original format, not the special editions or anything like that, right, was at this 24-hour marathon. It started at 3 a.m, and I'll never forget that so many people turned up and they didn't turn them away, that people were sitting in the aisles watching the movie. And like, it was a complete OH&S issue. If there was a fire, we were all dead. And it was like the last time that this was going to be available before all those prints were pulped. And I remember I was on a date. It was a Saturday night. I was on a date. And I said, do you want to go see Star Wars? And she was like, yeah, okay. And didn't expect what ended up happening. And I remember driving her home like at 7 a.m. going, wow, that was pretty amazing. She's like, you're more into this than other things, aren't you? And I'm like, yeah, you just discovered something very special about me. And she's like, wow, you were like, I think the comment was, there were times where I was hearing the lines in stereo, and I said, really? What's that? And she's like, you didn't realize you were saying them along with the character in perfect tone, perfect moment. And I said, and again, it's not about being a geek or being, there's an underlying resonance in that film that is absolutely universal, and that's why it was the success it was. And it's a very black and white. You got the good, you got the bad, but then you've got people going on a journey, and it is very simplistic, but it's also spectacular. And I think that's something that's actually missing on a lot of the films that are being created now. Yeah, you've got the Marvel films, and they're all about spectacular, but there was a marketing memo that went out when Star Wars started getting hype, which was, we need to look at this, that every boy is Luke and every girl is a Leia.
Okay.
Because they're the characters they're going to resonate with. And I think that there is enough in there that people do kind of go, I kind of see myself as this character. As the years have gone by, though, I do see a lot of people in Stormtrooper costumes and Imperial officers costumes. I do get worried that they identify with that, but it really was.
I think it's the
a
cool
time.
factor.
Yeah, it's the costume.
It's the cool factor. Yeah.
I mean, also in the 70s, America had just left the Vietnam conflict. It was a very negative time in that, and I think it was lightning in a bottle in the sense that here came this, what they thought was a children's, adventure film, and it just brought so much kind of wonder and spectacle back into the world. I always laugh. I don't know if you've ever seen that 70s show, but they do in the first season.
Yeah.
They do a special on Star Wars, and I always laugh at the end credits because they've been talking about this film and their parents go to see it, and one of the characters, Red, who's played by the amazing, and I'm going to forget his name, and I shouldn't, who's also in RoboCop. It's Clarence Boddicker. You know who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Freaks me
We're
out.
talking about Kirkwood Smith, who's an incredible actor, and he's all like, you guys are dope. You like this film, and it's the end, and there's a big flash on the screen. He's like, whoa. And he's like, yeah, you got it too. Like, even at the end, they got you in there. And he's like, oh, this is pretty amazing. Like, what the hell just happened? And I think a lot of people at that time, and it was very much something of the time, because recently I was working with someone who works in media, actually teaches media. And she asked me, what's your favorite film? And I said to her, I don't normally tell people that. I've got, my official answers, oh, what do you like? And it's like, I like Macbeth, right. And I said, look, the film that influenced me the most was Star Wars. And I actually said that because in their classroom, they had these Star Wars figures and like figurines. And I thought, one of us. And about a week later, she came in and said, I finally went and saw Star Wars. I'd never seen it. Wow. And she goes, this is the stupidest film I've ever seen. It's like, I'm not a 14-year-old boy. This is dumb. And I looked at her and I was like, okay, I get it. Because you are watching it at a time where everyone's taken these cues from these films and tried to reimagine the theme so many times. But you got to understand that in the 70s, nothing like that was around. And it was just like this force. And she was like, no, it's just a stupid movie. And I was like, okay. And she's looking at me going, what are you going to say? And I'm like, you don't have to like it. I'm like, in the back of my mind, I'm screaming, yeah, Disney doesn't spend $4.2 billion on a stupid film. No one cares. It's not your audience. You're not the audience they're after.
Well, and you kind of almost feel, she's not wrong, but you almost feel sorry for someone like that. It's like, if you can't enjoy this, if you can't have fun with this, and fun for all ages, it was fun for all ages. I have to say, and I'm not trying to be superior here, I'm not trying to be a smart ass. I remember the first time okay, all right, here I go. Well, no, the first time I saw Star Wars, that 12 o'clock screening at the Capital City Cinema in Springfield, Illinois, back in 1977, with my friend Chris Wright.
Don't shame him, bro.
I remember being blown away. Certain aspects of it were just astonishing to me. I remember parts of it going, well, this is a little goofy. They're just kind of shifting gears here, and some of this dialogue is a little odd. And I remember the part where I almost kind of rolled my eyes, where they get thrown into the trash compactor, and then it just was like, this thing happens. Now this thing happens. Okay, now the walls are closing in. But when the Dianogu, the eyeball, came up out of the water and went back down, I was like, that is like the cheesiest, stupidest thing I've seen in a long time. But then I was like swept right back into it. And it kind of almost, those to me were moments where, like, as a filmmaker years later, I look at the film and I go, I see how you kind of cobbled this thing together. I see how you wrapped tape around it and put some staples in it and kind of banged it together. Obviously, you get to Empire and it's like, we have the money and the resources to do this all right. But there was an element of Star Wars that just, you could just about see the screw heads and the paint showing, but it was held together just enough. But then I got over that initial skepticism because there was so many things in it that were so damn good. And I maintain to this day, the live action is pretty static. The live action is well designed, the characters are well drawn, but it's kind of like a play, and it just sort of sits there. And this is a criticism of Lucas. It just sort of sits there and plays out in front of the camera, and it's very interesting to watch. And then you've got these moments of dynamic visual effects that just light it all up and set it off. but I don't think it would have worked without either. It certainly wouldn't have worked without those characters and the cinematography, and it certainly wouldn't have worked without the visual effects. It was just, you said it, lightning in a bottle. You said it.
It's funny, the perspective, too, because I would have been 9 going on 10 when that came out. And that trash compactor scene, that was terrifying to me. I mean, and I think that little eyeball was a moment of levity.
Right.
That I feel like I remember everybody laughing when that happened. But yeah.
I think I wasn't used to that weird mix of tension and humor back to back, like literal shifts of tone within seconds. Yeah.
The eye comes out, right? And then Luke suddenly gets pulled underneath and we don't know what's going on with him. And then he comes out and he's wrapped up in this tentacle and you're like, oh my God, that eye thing is like...
How big is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then it just disappears and you're like, what? Hey there, film lovers. I hope you're really enjoying this episode of Cinematic Perspective, but I wanted to take a moment out and share with you a brand new project I'm super excited about. It's called Spectacular Distraction, where I uncover hidden gems and forgotten classics from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. The movies and shows that shaped pop culture, but somehow slipped through the cracks. Remember those films that only aired once or twice, disappeared completely, but got stuck in your head? We'll find them, break them down. The rip-offs, the inspirations, and we'll go through and find out all the different pieces that are missing from cinema today. So if you're as obsessed with cinema and pop culture as I am, come on a nostalgic journey with me. Search for Spectacular Distraction on YouTube, hit subscribe, and never miss out on a hidden gem, deep dives, or iconic moments. Because everything else is just spectacular distraction. One of the things that I wanted to ask you, because we've been talking about the fact that you saw it, and then there was time and you saw it, because this was not the time of Netflix, this was not the time of video recorders. How much of your memory of Star Wars was coupled together with either conversations you had with other people or things you might have read, or I have these really strong memories of scenes that I believed I saw when I was a child that never existed because there were things that I either got out of a comic book or I got out of reading an article, or there was something in a special where they were talking about something. And I'll go back and I'll go, hey, I was waiting for this and it didn't happen.
It's funny. I think my distortion, because yes, I know exactly what you're talking about, but mine came in a different way. Like, I didn't remember the tech. Like, I think I remembered all the story elements and the drama and everything fairly accurately. But then, yeah, I would say a line from the movie and somebody else would say, no, the line was this. There was a little bit of that. But I remember building this model from scratch of a TIE fighter. So, and I got...
From memory.
Yeah, from memory. And like a couple of horrible photos in magazines. Like, we didn't have the big picture, the tabletop art books of high definition photos. So I probably had a couple of crappy photos of TIE fighters. And then I've seen the movie 2 or 3 times at this point. So I'm building a TIE fighter from memory. And I remember I so grossly over-exaggerated the size of a TIE fighter and the cockpit that I built and the window and the tiny... I mean, I made a TIE fighter that in scale was like 100-foot tall TIE fighter. It was this massive thing. And I've come to since realize, TIE fighters weren't that big. They're pretty tiny little balls with a guy stuck in there. So I got things wrong. Or I built a Star Destroyer out of balsa wood. And I built it just like an arrowhead wedge with like a block and a tower and like no detail. And then later on I went back and was like, whoa, I got that completely wrong. And it was a good effort. So for me, it was more the visual stuff of what I got wrong. But I knew people who would talk about, and I remember scenes from the later movies with people who were like, and there was that scene when this happened. And I'm like, that didn't happen. No. When this happened and the monster and blah, blah, and I'm like, no, this is what happened. No, that's not what happened. I'm like, oh yeah, that like people, what they would absorb and what would imprint on their heads churned up with the emotion, or they would go back and see it later and go, well, that wasn't nearly as horrible. It's like the first time you see that leg fall to the bottom of the ocean in Jaws, and you're sure you've just seen the worst massacre in history. And then you realize, no, it was a freaking rubber leg and it fell to the bottom of the ocean. I didn't see any of the other stuff I thought I did.
Well, Lucas changing and re-editing and sending out new versions didn't help what you thought you remembered anyway.
I think that's a whole other episode.
Yeah.
But before that, one of the things that I realized with the excitement of Star Wars hitting, there was something that I'd never seen before, because there isn't a radio version of Jaws or Close Encounters of the Third Kind, but there was the radio play version of Star Wars, which was pretty amazing because it opened up a lot of like things that you wouldn't have expected. It was like 12 episodes, and it literally is the story. Usually the first two, though, the first episode is Luke's life on Tatooine that has nothing to do well before, and then the second one happens to be Leia's setting up of her getting the plans and running away from the Empire, and then we're into the movie. And I remember thinking to myself, hold on, there's a land speeder event, you know, that Luke's in with his friend and all the rest, and that I had heard that as a kid, and of course I'm imagining what it would have been like in the movie, and of course, like I'm like, where's this scene? Which was inspired by one of the versions that Lucas, you know, he was very much into cars and racing and all the rest of it. So that's why we get the pod racing scene in episode 1. So it's really interesting that there's so many different reimaginings of the same story. You've got the film that's canon, you've got the comic book that comes out, which is 6 issues. You've got the radio plays, which are, you know, if my brain is still going and I need to get to sleep, I will put that on and I will put a timer on to turn it off an hour later, and I'm asleep, not because of the fact that it's boring, but because I know it and I'm disengaging.
It's like wrapping yourself in a warm blanket.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was at UCLA, I had them on CD, and that's, you know, I was away from home. It was a really tough year in that sense, and I was able to go and listen, and it was a little bit of home. You know, it was a little bit of something I was familiar with. So, and I really love those radio plays. If you've never seen them before, definitely hunt them down. I think there's a version of it on YouTube where someone's actually edited all the breaks out, right. So it literally goes for 7 hours. But it's so cool because the sequence where Han, Luke, Obi-Wan, Chewie, the droids are under the deck plates when the stormtroopers come in after they've captured the Falcon on the Death Star. Well, I mean, we don't know what's going on until they're revealed in the film. There's a whole scene where they're having conversation of what's going on, because in an audio play you can't show that. It's not a visual story medium. So it's kind of fun to be there, and you know, they're like, that's 1, that's 2, and you hear Chewie go, "Murr," and he's like, shut up, Chewie, I think there's 4, you know, guys came onto the ship, and it's kind of fun to see it from that different perspective. So it's you're familiar with it, but again, it's amazing how these products, I guess, this media then gets re-released to a whole new audience in the 90s, and a lot of people who had never heard them before are like, wow, look at what was going on. And of course, I don't know if you're aware, but it was Lucas's old university alma mater that made those audio plays, the radio play versions.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so he gifted the rights to make a radio play, and I think they were awesome, actually.
I enjoyed them.
And they got Mark Hamill back. I
would sit down at like noon on Saturday and listen to them on NPR or something, and it was really cool. Okay, so Star Wars plays, we all see it at a young age. The movie's over. My jaw is kind of slack. I'm not really sure what to do or think. I have to absorb it. I have to think about it. But, and we've probably talked about this on other episodes, but by the spring of 1978, I have borrowed a Super 8mm camera from a family friend. I'm starting to shoot my first bits of film. So, I loved Jaws, I loved movie making, I loved researching special effects, reading about King Kong, looking up all this old stuff, but I was still on track to do something else. I was going to be an oceanographer or an astronaut or something like that, which, interestingly enough, were career jobs that were inspired by movies, and interestingly enough.
Parallels, my friend, parallels. I'm a scuba diver, and I was going to be an astronaut too, so there you go.
So then Star Wars comes along, and I'm like, okay, wait a minute, maybe we've got a career change here. And so by spring of 1978, I picked up a movie camera, and I'm starting to shoot movies. And my career path, I think, is pretty much set at that point. I don't understand the reality of it, and I don't understand what it's going to take. But that was my first experience with, okay, let me build a balsa wood X-Wing fighter, and let me hollow it out and stick a firecracker in it, and let me fly it across the garage ceiling on a wire and blow it up. Why doesn't this look like Star Wars? And that was my first experience with, okay, all right, so there's a lot more. And I knew, I was reading up on stuff. I'd seen the specials. I knew there were computer-controlled cameras. I knew there was blue screen. I knew there was optical printers. But, I would do this stuff, and it would just look like complete and utter crap.
I want to know if you still have any of those films.
I do. I have the Super 8 films. I should get them.
I so want to see them.
Now, there were things...
Oh, that's a special. That's a special Patreon extra. They're right there.
There were things I did in there where you look at it and you go, oh, that's really creative, but it doesn't quite work because I didn't technically know how to focus it right or do this. But there were things I did that you'd go, okay, I see something. I see a spark there. But what happened for me, of course, was that I kept at it. Like, okay, this doesn't look as good as it could. I need to figure out how to make this look better. And I just kept working at it. And then my film career kind of went on from there. What happened when the movie was over for the two of you? Gayle, I know you were pretty young, and I know you're a girl, but what happened
We'll start with Gayle.
Yeah.
I don't know that Star Wars had that kind of career path impact on me.
Kick
That's
you out.
it.
Okay, that's it.
Divorce.
You ruined the podcast. That's it.
I'm done.
And thank you so much, everyone. That's the end of the cinema. No, it's all right.
No, seriously. I was 10 years old. I loved it. I enjoyed it. We went and saw it when we could. As a family in the 80s, I don't even remember what the re-release level was at that point, but we got the whole family together to go to the movie theater.
Okay, so it was a social phenomenon.
Oh,
for you,
absolutely.
though. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Whether it impacted your career, it impacted your life.
Right, yeah. Down in the basement by the ping pong table, we had the movie posters that we got from, I don't remember if it was Burger Chef, Burger King, McDonald's, wherever it was.
Yeah.
We had the set of glasses, I think. So, yeah, socially, yes, it was definitely an impact. We had Splinter of the Mind's Eye.
Right.
We've got the big comic book that I still have.
Right,
yes. The giant size comic book adaptation.
The
We've
treasury,
got
the
record
golden
album.
treasury.
You
version?
keep talking.
Yeah. So, and I don't think the record album that we had was the NPR thing you were talking about, Gayle. But
The Story of Star Wars, yes.
Yeah,
That's the one where they splice in the audio effect. Someone gave me a cassette tape of it in the early 90s, and I still have it. It's awesome.
So Wyatt and I both actually own a copy of this.
Yep.
And we both own the
This
Story of
was
Star
not
Wars,
planned.
right?
This was not planned. This is just up here in our attic.
Yeah.
This is so when she mentioned it, I had not planned this for today, and this is her. And for all of you comic collectors out there,
Does it smell?
It still smells?
oh yeah.
Yeah.
And then
Smells
we've
like
got the,
money.
yeah. Yeah. It's kind of beat up, but
But you know what? That's what I love about. I had an Empire Strikes Back version of that, and
the
it fell
comic?
apart. I read it so many times. And yep, the Story of Star Wars, the LP.
Story of Star Wars
Wow.
picture disc.
I don't know
yeah.
that I have the picture disc, but I know I've got that somewhere in the collection as well.
So even though this was a huge career thing for me, it wasn't a career thing for you, but it was still an impact in your life.
Oh,
and
yeah.
If you had the comics and you had...
Yeah.
So would you call you... So you were probably at least as big a fan as I was. It's just for me, it ignited that career spark. I think we
Right.
probably both enjoyed it equally, and it affected our lives. It just affected me from a career trajectory.
Yeah. And granted, the fact that I was also, still am, 3 years younger than you, especially at that time, even a couple of years later, if the movie had been re-released, and I wouldn't have been able to go and see it multiple times. It's just... I wasn't old enough that Mom would have just dropped us off at the movie theater and said, go see it.
It's kind of creepy when a 7-year-old girl sits in a theater all day by themselves and you'd be asking some questions.
My mom would just wad up a couple of dollar bills and throw them at me and say, "Get out of here. Go to the movies." "Mom, can we go to..." "Shh. Here, go. Get out." No. I kid. I tease. Gil.
Yes.
Gil. I know you were young.
I was young too, but I my focus was then anything to do with Star Wars, right? So I talked about this before. I used to try and sneak my father's Super 8 camera and just look through the viewfinder and hear that tick, 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 tick voice sound that when you pull it. And he used to go crazy about that. I never had the chance to shoot any Super 8 film because it was just too expensive. And unfortunately, our situation when I was growing up was we just didn't have spare money for that sort of stuff. So they knew my interest, but I think my parents always thought that I'd grow out of it. Like, it was just like, everyone's kind of excited. I mean, I remember seeing things like Star Wars postage stamps, and I'm like, can I have it? And no. And it's like, my parents didn't even get like Star Wars action figures for me when I was a kid. Everything that I have, and I still have them, were gifts from other people. Like, they were birthday presents, or someone. I was over someone's place, and they're like, we got you this, and it's like, I have a C-3PO figure that must have come from 77, 78, and like, its limbs just flop around and it's lost all its chrome. But that's my first ever figure.
Sure.
And I remember my grandparents actually buying me some figures as well. But I also was really like, I tried to emulate things. So I remember at my grandparents' home before they passed away, I actually found it. I had taken MDF and I had made like an X-Wing fighter, and it was this huge big thing. And it was like a cross on another beam, and I had drawn in where the cockpit was and all the rest of it. And it was way too big and all the rest of it, but it was just really, I thought it was really nice that they had kept it.
Right.
Because that's what I was kind of interested in. Because I didn't have the outlet to be able to go out, and I know that with your parents, they were very artistic. My parents weren't. So, I kept running into the problem that I wanted supplies, and it was like, that's a waste of money kind of attitude. We don't have the money, it's a waste. You're not going to make a Picasso that we can sell, therefore, and so I kind of went more the research way. So I would buy magazines. Okay. I would go to the library. I would read constantly. Again, I don't know why, but my parents had a video recorder. So I would tape things. And when they were at work, I would watch them over and over again. I was filling up my knowledge base on how to do it. And it was kind of really interesting that, come past 83, Star Wars is done. Everyone's like, that's not cool anymore. And I'm like, what are you talking about? This is still amazing stuff, right? And I'm still kind of, I'm going into stores and finding old comic books and still lapping up the mythology and the story. I'm going and finding old magazines because really, late 70s and especially the 80s, so many people were trying to emulate the success of Star Wars. It was just a plethora of this genreistic science fiction kind of effects movies, and I'm like, where can I get these? Where can I get more information? Where can I expose myself? So, I remember going to my first video store, rental store. We had a Betamax, and everything was VHS, and they had this small beta section, and I'm like, can I get Saturn V?
Right. And
my parents are like, no, it's a horror film. And I remember they played Alien on like a Saturday night movie on free-to-air TV. That's the first time I ever heard the term Alien, right? This film is so influential on my interest of storytelling. And I remember going, can I tape it and watch it the next day? And my parents said, we'll watch it, and if it's appropriate, you can watch it. And I remember sneaking. My parents had a bedroom with a TV set on, and they had it on, and the bathroom was next door, and I was kind of like watching from the hallway. And I remember watching the opening thing, and I said, I'll watch the rest of it, because I don't want to get caught, so they say, no, you can't watch it. I remember the next morning, I'm like, can I watch a movie? And they're like, absolutely not. Like, absolutely not. But the irony of it was that, like, a few years later, I found the Book of Alien, which is a photo story book of scene by scene, because, again, you didn't have, at the time of the 70s, you didn't have videotapes, and I bought the book, and I had stills of the chestburster scene, right in front of me, and I would walk around with the book, the Art of Alien and the Book of Alien, and like people were like, my mother's like, you can't watch that movie. And recently I was thinking about it. We were traveling in New Zealand, and we were at a hotel, and I was somewhere. I think I went and saw a movie, and they came to pick me up, and my mother was like, you're not going to believe what they're playing on the in-house system. They're playing Aliens. Why would anyone want to watch such a horrific film like that? And I realize now, she's like wanting me to go, yes, I wouldn't watch it. I watched that and I fell in love. I was like, dude, I want to be a space marine. You know, I want to be Hudson. You know, it's like, I don't care if I get eaten. Again, I was like that film, just the storytelling. Forget the you know, the gorish kind of horrific element, but the ability to be in that moment with the characters, like, blew me away. And just literally earlier this week, I said, hey, do you remember when we were in New Zealand, we saw Aliens? She goes, yeah, I wouldn't watch that. I go, do you have any idea how that influenced what I went on to do? And she's like, yeah, but we didn't know that at that time. So again, it was like that, we'll invest in it if it's going to lead somewhere, where really life's about trying something out and seeing if it works and then keep moving. And as much as I love my parents, I kind of hope that they see that, because they used to take comic books away from me. And of course, that was all just training in visual storytelling. And they were like, why would you want to read? Don't read comic books. They're not legitimate. And I'm like, that's exactly what I needed to understand. You know, I'm like, I had a conversation with them when I graduated as a cinematographer. You know, here I am graduating from UCLA with a master's degree. And I'm like, you know, those comic books, this is a part of that. And they're like, we don't know. I'm like, that's okay. Not a problem.
My mom, on the other hand, just gave me back a bunch of the comic books that I had as a kid. I mean, it's a stack.
Awesome.
Like
Yeah.
that big that. And granted, mine were all the Richie Rich and Sad Sack, and yeah, but my brothers had all the superhero comic books. Those are the ones I had. But I was excited. I was thrilled when Mom said, do you want these? I'm like, yes, it's childhood.
Absolutely. And it's a rite of passage. I mean, you know, to you know, you go over to your friend's place and there'd be a comic book you didn't read and you'd be like, I need a moment. I need to read this. I need to put this into my lexicon. So for me, my formal filmmaking or storytelling, visual storytelling more than anything else, came around when I was about 16, 17, when a friend of mine said, we're setting up a public access station. Do you want to come on board and do something? And I was like, yeah, okay, no problem. I'm like, I don't know what this is about, but you know, that's one step closer. Before that, when people had video cameras and stuff, I was always the person they gave the cameras to because I seemed to understand enough because I had that kind of background. And then out of that came, we need someone to direct a documentary. And I'm like, they're like, no one wanted to do it. And I'm like, I'll give it a shot. And I had no idea what I was doing.
No one wants to do it. Can you imagine today?
Because you had to edit on, like, you know, with 2 VHS machines set up, you know, and I had enough knowledge to know the process. I know you shoot stuff, you look at it, you take the pieces you want, you put it together, you blend it all in with some audio, you check the level meters. You know, I remember going in and, you know, getting super excited when I first went to film school and they had a U-matic setup that had a like a VU meter in it, so that you could actually dial in blacks and blues and you know the primary colors as such, and you'd sit there and it was all electronic, so you'd kind of shift the color spectrum on the tape. So you had it was almost like color grading, but all you had to do was take these little dots and you'd put them in these windows that were on the thing, and it was, if you could get it kind of close, it looked good. Or going in and I want to do a stop motion animation, but they only had videotape, so I would record 1 second on-offs and move the character, right? And then I would go into the U-matic bay and just kind of pre-roll 10 seconds and just 2 seconds. And people were like, how do you do this? And I'm like, you got to try. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't, but I was trying different things. And I think that's the saving grace I had as an undergrad. They were like getting rid of film students left, right, and center because they got rid of the film course. And they're like, the skill guy's doing other things with, like, you know, home computers and videotape. We'll keep him on, which was kind of interesting. I'm sure they ruled the day that they did that. So I really got my hands dirty as a teenager, kind of towards the end of my high school life. Then I've told the story that my mother was like, this is what you should be doing, go and study that. And then I remember my first film wasn't Super 8, but it was 16 mil. And I saved up a whole lot of money, bought 3 minutes worth of 16 mil film footage that cost me $1,000. It was $300 for the film, and then the rest of it was to actually get it processed and then put onto the videotape. Right. And it was terrible. It was horrible. I made so many freaking mistakes, but that was, if you were a filmmaker, you had to be legitimate. You had to film on 16 mil. And after that, I was just like, I went and bought myself a video camera and started just making stuff that I never showed anyone.
Do you have any of that still?
Oh, I do. I do. I do. I do have some of that sort of stuff. I might have to go and dig out a VHS machine, because I would do things like emulate. I was very visual effects orientated. So I remember spending like all my summer vacation money on buying a thing called a Miro capture card, which was one of the first video capture cards you could get for the PC. It was a Pinnacle Miro card. I think the company became Pinnacle, but it was Miro. And you had a super video input on this card that would grab frames. You'd play back a videotape and it would grab the frames in a motion JPEG format. And so that I could put into a computer video footage and then start using, let's say, Photoshop, or this is before After Effects, or use really primary tools like the motion tools or the title tools in Premiere. In fact, I won a Cinematography Society award as a student by doing a whole science fiction film where the only way I got the models to move was I would use the title feature, and they'd fly in a title, but instead of a title, I'd put the image there. So I was able to push and pull, and it would give me some sort of generic motion. And I was able to kind of trick the system into doing that. And people were like, I don't know how you did that, but it kind of looks okay. But here's the problem. In this shot, you've got white light, and on this shot, it's yellow light. So the ship keeps changing colors. And I'm like, great, no problem. I'll fix it next time. But again, it was this idea of being able to play with these things. So, I would go and I would, let's say, emulate, let's say, a Viper's view landing on the Galactica launch bay. Oh, sorry, the landing bay. But it would be a still. So I would see how far I could push that image out and then zoom into it. And then I would make a mock-up of, let's say, the view screen. So it kind of looked like the pilot's view. And I'm talking, this is the early 90s, where it was like, okay, if I want this shot, how do I get to it? And if I can't go and work with like optical printers, how do I do it at home for next to nothing? Of course, the complete irony of this is that the minute I get to UCLA, they have an optical printer that they're selling. It's packed up. And they go, it's being picked up next week. And I go, that's next week. Can I use it now? They said, if you, they didn't want to, but they basically said, if you unpack it and then pack it up ready for delivery, when the guys come, you can use it. And I remember going, great, where do I get film? And I'm trying to work out, do I have $1,000? And they're like, oh, we got short ends here. It's like $20 for some short ends. And I'm like, great. And just buying like every bit of short ends that the department had for students just to mess around with. And I'm bypacking stuff and exposing it. And in that week, I got a shot of a UFO, kind of like there's a guy standing outside his house and this big UFO, which I could have done in camera, but I wanted the experience of sitting there and drawing out these mats, because it was the last time I was going to ever be able to do that. And, we played this it was about 30-second clip, and they were like, cool. Did you hand draw the? I'm like, yeah. And they're like, wow, that all came out really well. And I'm like, great. And they're like, it's a shame you can't do any more of that, because now we've got Apple computers and we can use After Effects. And I was like, that's cool. I just wanted to understand the process. I just wanted to emulate what I was reading about for so long. So when I hit the ground running in that sense. And I think I'm a much better technician than I am a storyteller. I'm still working on that part.
I really think that having to flex those creative muscles is really important. I think that you and I both, in our backgrounds, have had very little money to try and do things with, and expectations from others that, oh, well, this is going to look like Star Wars or going to look like MTV or whatever is popular at the time. And you're like, okay, well, how do I do that? So Gayle, like you were saying, with what I have, how do I make it look like a cockpit and that we're landing on the landing bay? And I think that kind of, again, stretching the creative muscles is really, really a good thing. Even if you end up having a ton of money later and you're able to just do it much more easily because of the tools you have, I think having those creative outlets is good.
It's like James Cameron once famously or infamously said, and this is a quote from an article in Cinefex. He said, And I think this was in regard to Aliens. And he said, if you can achieve a visual effect with the equivalent of throwing a rubber chicken against a wall, why do more? And then the irony then, of course, is that James Cameron has made some of the most expensive films in history with some of the most complicated CGI
Some amazing
ever
rubber chickens.
conceived. So it's interesting that James Cameron, who originally was like my hands-on, low-budget filmmaking guru, who now has become this high-end CGI guy that I can hardly identify with anymore.
Hi, it's Gayle. And if pickleball is your kind of fun, let me introduce you to Backhanded Compliments. It's a brand I started with my niece Evie, and it began as a project she was doing in college for a design class. But when I saw the art, I knew we had to do something more with it. So we launched Backhanded Compliments, which is irreverent pickleball apparel for the passive-aggressive pickleball player. We've got graphic tees with phrases on them like, "That was so good for a beginner," or "Make me a sandwich or get out of the kitchen." You can find everything at backhandedpickleball.com. Be sure to use promo code PODCAST for 15% off your first order.
So Star Wars happens. It's hugely influential. It's lightning in a bottle. It's a media sensation. It's very much a product of the time. And then to understand what things were like back then, we eventually found out that there were more films, but early on, we weren't assured of the fact that we were going to be seeing Star Wars and George Lucas films for the next 40 years. We just knew we loved Star Wars and what the heck was going to happen. And I remember suddenly came this novel called Splinter of the Mind's Eye.
Oh, yeah.
And me, like one of my friends came to school now, and it's like the following year now. It's like 1978, and my friend shows up at school that day going, "Look," and he shows me this, and we all freaked out. I mean, half the school population freaked out. And I remember like leaving school that day and going to the local bookstore, and I had to have Splinter of the Mind's Eye.
Okay, so with Splinter of the Mind's Eye, was it the story of Star Wars, or was it like the next...
So there's some history.
Here's the fascinating thing about Splinter of the Mind's Eye, and this is why I bring it up so that you can all understand what happened. Apparently, there were two versions of what George wanted to do, and he still really didn't know, is this going to be the biggest hit in history? Is it going to be a total flop? But there was actually a 50-50 plan, and the 50-50 plan was, okay, if this makes $500 million, I will make the rest of my films. If it makes $100, I'm not making anything. But if it makes $50 or $100 million, it's successful, but it doesn't warrant me launching into a multi-film saga. So what's the halfway ground? What's the mid-ground? And the mid-ground was a smaller, more compact, direct sequel that answers a bunch of questions and wraps up a bunch of things, but happens on a smaller scale. Which, that's what sequels were more in the 70s. Which, if you got a sequel at all, you got a sequel that was maybe going to be a little less expensive and a little less spectacular, that wasn't expected to make the same amount of money that the first film did.
Okay.
It was a diminishing returns. The Planet of the Apes films. The Planet of the Apes films were designed on diminishing returns. The first one was huge. It made a shit ton of money. So they made a less expensive one that made money, and then they just kept making less expensive ones until they'd sort of worn out that whole thing. So Splinter of the Mind's Eye was the halfway point. Splinter of the Mind's Eye was, well, if it makes good money but not great money, we'll do a sequel, but it'll be this smaller story. Well, by 1978, they'd realized, well, shoot, we're going to do the rest of this trilogy. But he wanted to release the book anyway. So we all got kind of suckered in.
thinking that this was going to be the next movie?
Well, we didn't know. So we get Splinter of the Mind's Eye, and we go, this is really cool. And it was my first experience with, well, wait a minute, because then they announced The Empire Strikes Back. I'm like, well, then what's going on with this? And that's, so Splinter of the Mind's Eye was by Alan Dean Foster in association with George Lucas. It was sort of the lower budget sequel, but then it got pushed to the wayside for The Empire Strikes Back. And so, yeah, a little bit of history there.
Okay.
Let me share some of the history that I've come across over the years, because the Splinter of the Mind's Eye is, again, one of those things where the first time I ever saw it, there was some kid walking around a library with it in his hand, and I was just like, I walked up to him like, are you borrowing that? And he's like, yes, and walked off, and I was like, when he brings it back, how do I get a copy of this? Like, there's more Star Wars out there. So Alan Dean Foster, it just so happened that a friend of mine who was backpacking ran into Alan Dean Foster and became friendly with him. So I was able to ask him a couple of questions about Splinter of the Mind's Eye. And the idea was that at the time, Harrison Ford had not committed to coming back as Han Solo. And that's why in that story, there is no Han Solo element to the story. It's about Luke and Leia going on a mission and then basically, going off on their own. There's certain elements in it that have turned up in other Star Wars stories. And the story is based around a thing called the Kyber crystal, which then gets mentioned in Rogue One and is now the crystal that is in all the different lightsabers. Because they couldn't use Han and Chewie, they introduced characters as well that that kind of mimic the Wookiees. They're called the Yuzum. And unfortunately, they have to kill those characters off. But what's really interesting is that Darth Vader's in the film, and he does end up battling or basically fighting with Luke, very similar ways that happens in The Empire Strikes Back. Now, if you haven't read the book before, I'm sorry, you've had 40 odd years, so I'm going to say spoilers.
Right.
But at the end, in the middle of the battle, Luke actually Darth Vader's taunting him and basically says something along the lines of, I'll kill you like I killed Obi-Wan Kenobi. And Luke screams out at him, you didn't kill him, I am Obi-Wan Kenobi, which was a huge moment in the book because you're like, we didn't know what happened to Obi because he disappeared at the end of Star Wars. So we're like, is he now part of Luke? What's going on there? But the thing that really was interesting to me, and this is what I asked Alan when I was able to interview him, was that at the end of the book, after the battle is done and they escape, they find the droids turned off. And C-3PO says to Luke, we couldn't do anything. Darth Vader had our access codes and shut us down. Now, great for a story, but then when you realize that in episode 1, Anakin makes C-3PO, it makes total sense that he had the access codes to shut him down.
But do you really believe that all connected? I don't believe it did.
I had to ask the question, right? I'm like, Alan, you wrote the original Star Wars novel. It's ghostwritten by you. It's the credits given to George Lucas. Then he asked you to come back, and this happens. And he looked at me and he laughed and he said, "We never thought that far ahead." And I said, "That's fine. I just wanted to know whether that was mentioned." He goes, "I just needed a way of explaining why the droids weren't destroyed, and that was a good thing." And I go, "Yeah, but you know what? In this world of everything's tied together, there's at least a YouTube video of the idea of like, did Anakin Skywalker know in the alternate of Splinter of the Mind's Eye?" Probably one of the greatest kind of continuations. And it's interesting as well because they do play on the sexual tension between Luke and Leia in this. There is no idea that they are brother and sister.
Right.
Luke's actually even mentions in the book that he's happy to have time alone with Leia because he doesn't want to compete with Han. My original copy of the book is split in half. I've lost the second half, but I still reread the first half of the book. So I know exactly to which point the story goes. But I also have a very, very soft spot for the Han Solo Adventures, which was a separate a trilogy of books that talks about Han and Chewie's adventures before Star Wars.
Right.
And one of my favorite novels, there's 3 of them. Off memory, the first one's Han Solo at Star's End, which is an amazing read. The next one is Han Solo's Revenge, which is my personal favorite. It is, if you like the character, if you're into Han Solo, this is all about someone's paying me and they've run off and I'm getting to get my money. And it also establishes the whole idea of why they're so close. Han and Chewie are so close and why they... and why Han and Chewie are so against slavery, which is the backstory is that Chewbacca was a slave and he freed them. Right. And there's an incredible moment in that book where someone tries to bring slaves on the Falcon and there's like 20 guys holding guns on them and they still turn it around because they feel so passionate. Not on this ship, says Han. And he makes it happen. And the third one was kind of almost like an Indiana Jones story where they're on a treasure hunt. I think it's Han Solo and the Lost Legacy. Though, again, if I've had a hard week and I want to just turn my brain off and wrap myself in something nice, I will go and grab my anthology of Han Solo novels, and I will be like, time to go and visit Star's End, or let's go see how Han's going to go and get his revenge out. Very different feel as well, because these were written before Empire and Return. So the development in the character that we spoke about earlier isn't there. He is rough as guts, pirate, like with a heart of gold. But he will shoot you under the table, and he will take the money he has earned, and he will not blink back, because the universe is a shitty place, and if it wasn't for Chewie, he would be out there by himself against the universe. And it's kind of, there's some great moments in there. I would love to see those stories actually turned into a TV series or a movie.
Which they could probably do.
There's definitely a lot of material that we both were exposed to that we connect on. But the foundation, like if I hadn't gone and been introduced to it as a 3-year-old and you didn't go and see it as a 13-year-old, and we both had this inspiration to even just explore. I mean, I have a lot of respect for both you and Gayle, because you're still in the business as far as I'm concerned. You actively are making things, whether it's your own films, whether you're doing it as for corporate stuff, whether you're helping out other filmmakers, you recently just sent me a message saying we're going to have to put off the next recording because I've got to go and make some props. And then when you show me the prop, I'm walking around the house showing it to my partner, and she's like, did he make it for you? It's like you just got a present. And I'm like, I get where Wyatt is. Like, I get what's going on. And I know that socially, before we even thought about making this podcast, every time we'd get together and talk, it was always finished like, when are you shooting something? I'll get my butt to America. Like, right. I want to be standing next to you. I want to be behind the camera. I want to be a part of that process, because there's something really unique, especially when you can work with some people who get it. And, while you do make a living out of this, your personal projects are not about flipping a profit. It's about making the work. And I've always found that to be the most creative and inspiring and fulfilling processes. If I could go back and make student films with all my friends like we did at university, without having to worry about how do we sell it. Instead, it's a focus of how do we tell the story? How do we get the most bang out of what we have access to? That's the true artistic element. And unfortunately, you go through the system and you realize it's show business. There's show and there's business. And a lot of people focus on the business.
You're saying all that, and my producer brain just kicked in and went, however, if any of our viewers or listeners would like to donate to us, we're more than happy to.
Absolutely.
Or if they would like to buy copies of our films.
Well, tying this back into Star Wars, I mean, obviously it was a huge influence, and it was a snapshot in time. It was a time that I think part of the whole reaction to, did you like the prequels? Did you like the sequels? Whether you liked them or didn't like them or felt they were valid or not valid, they're happening in a very different time and place. They're happening in a very different environment. Those first Star Wars films, not only were they unique and special, but the time frame and the level of innocence that they took place in, part of that has fueled what I am today, only because, Gayle and I have been joking, we've been working on a project recently that's our personal project, but it very much feels like Star Wars days, because it's like, I got a camera, you got a barn, we're free this weekend, let's make a movie together. Only now we just happen to be professionals, so we know how to do this.
And
but
we have the toys.
It's still...
You have a bridge, I have a copy of the something else, let's go and do something.
Yeah, it's literally
without
like...
giving too much away.
We're gonna shoot, let's shoot Saturday. Okay, cool, let's shoot Saturday. And then we kind of have a plan, but we also are just sort of very much like those days back in the 70s. We're sort of figuring it out and making it up as we go.
Oh, yeah.
And experimenting and having fun. And I think that was, maybe that's happening today. I don't get the idea that that's happening to the same degree.
That filmmakers are doing that?
Yeah, and I think I came to this creativity at a young age through a young point of view, and I think I still feel that and embody that, and that's part of what's working for me now as an adult, is I still have that sense of wonder when when I'm able to create the image in the camera that I had in my head, there's that thrill, there's that feeling of when that happens. And I think that still propels me. I mean, yeah, it's nice to get paid for it. Yeah, it's nice for an audience to see it. But it's still that, that artistic expression of, okay, I had this idea, I wrote it out on paper, I made a plan, and now there it is, actually visible for other people to see. And that all started back in 1977, and that all has grown since then, and it's changed and modified. But I think it's valid to talk about, and I think young people today should listen. And these old people talking about the way things used to be, and in my day, yeah, but give it a listen sometimes, because there's, my parents talked about how things were in their day, and I get it now. I get it. I see the value of what they were talking about.
It's because you're old, Wyatt. That's why. You're old.
Yeah,
oh, no.
exactly.
I know.
Look at this.
I know.
That's...
I know.
And I'm older too. And you know what? Yeah, see? Same. But what I was going to say is, I remember, people saying to me, how can you be a filmmaker? You haven't lived. You haven't got any stories to tell. And I'd be like, F you, man. It's like, like Sam Raimi was 19 when he made, Evil Dead. And I'm 23 and I'm behind the and it's like, it's that condescending. But now, later on in my life, I'm like, you know what? People used to ask me, they're like, why don't you have any romance in your films? And I'm like, I'm bad at relationships. I didn't have a relationship to be able to understand what was going on, But now, like, there's a lot more that I can add in when I'm crafting my story and putting it in. Back then, it was all about, how do I make a spaceship look like, this big, make look this big? And part of that journey was, if I want to go and learn how to do that, I've got to learn how to use a camera. And, just recently I was asked to show some students, in 20 minutes how to use a camera. And I'm like, I can't, and there was a part of me that also said, it's been a long time since I've actually been behind the camera and started dialing in, the different settings to get the image that I want. And I'm like, you know what? That's a skill. You got to practice it. And again, right. I'm kind of really inspired to go and do that again. But yeah, I hear exactly what you're saying. If you are a filmmaker, whether you are independent or you've got a studio behind you, you can have all the money in the world. It's not going to answer the question if you have to work it out yourself. And I remember some people saying, how do you explain directing? It's like, you need to take a direction. And even if it's the wrong direction, that's okay. You got to be able to, you can pivot. You can go, I was going this way, but really I need to go a little bit to the left to get to this point so I can get through what's going on, So I need to go from 1 to 2 to 3. And someone goes, yeah, but when you get to 9, you haven't got anything in there. And I'm like, if there's one experience that I've learned in life is, if you can get to 3, it's an amazing thing. When people see you go 1, 2, 3, something happens and suddenly 4 falls into place. And then you do 5, and then someone sees what you're doing, and they're going, I've got this thing here that if you want to use it, and you go, my gosh, that's the answer for 11, right? So everything flows in, and that's something you can't teach people. I can talk about it now, but until you're actually in the experience itself, I remember working on a film, and I'm like, I need this type of car. I don't have it in the budget. I'm flexible, but I need an old school car. And someone was watching us film some stuff, and they were just talking, and we were walking back to their place. I think they were like, let me show you some. And he had this car there, and I said, can you bring your car out? And he said, no, but I'll give you the keys, and you can borrow it. And I'm like, I'm like in this little MG racing around. This guy doesn't know me from Adam, but he's like, well, you must be responsible because you're making films, and all these people are kind of following your lead. And I'm thinking to myself going, is it stolen? Is it hot? Is the cops going to pull me over? But it's an amazing thing because I couldn't go any further than that. And you've got to have faith in the process. In Los Angeles, though, I learned the hard way because it is a filmmaking town. You pay for everything. People come up to you and say, you can shoot in my house. They're going to come up with you with a bill and a set price because if you're not doing it, someone else will come in and pay that amount. Unless you have a personal relationship with someone, maybe, I could just imagine if Wyatt and I had known each other when we were both in the town, I probably would have come over to where he's working and be like, can I borrow this for a shot and I'll bring it back tomorrow? And he'd probably go, can't because we're using it on this film and it's not done, it's done especially, but, I've got this thing here and they rent it out, just borrow it, come back, those backdoor rentals that is so famous for in Los Angeles. But it's an amazing, it's just an amazing experience if you've ever wanted to make a film. And I don't care if you've never made one before or if you made, if you're Christopher Nolan, go and make a film with no support. Do it yourself. You be the instigator, the foundation. And, I always say to people, they go, where do you get your budget? And I literally take my wallet out and go, how much money do I have? It's like literally that's what I can do.
You were talking about having to come up with $1,000 to shoot your 3 minutes of footage. Now everybody has a camera better than that in their back pocket.
Oh, yeah.
Which is both a
Forget
good
a
thing
camera.
and a bad thing.
This thing.
Because I don't
That's
think...
what I mean.
iPhone. My iPhone is a better camera than my 16mm camera that I still have today if I were to shoot 16mm footage, right? It looks like 16mm, but sharper. I'm able to, for no cost, I could shoot 24 hours footage straight on my phone and just keep unloading it. But the problem with that, though, is I've got to go through the 24 hours for those sequences that I want. Yep. And that's a discipline that I see people shooting on Reds and Scarlets and 7K.
Oh, just keep rolling. We'll get it eventually.
And I go, yeah, that's cool, man. But do you have enough hard drives? And do you have a system that's going to be able to process it afterwards? How are you going to watch your dailies?
Do you have an editor that wants to sit through that?
Oh my gosh, one of the things that I used to love doing when I used to get my 16mm converted was the first thing I'd do was get a VHS copy with time code, and I'd sit there and I go, that's a shot. That's a shot. That's a shot. And then I would just splice them down onto another VHS tape and kind of put them together before I got into the edit suite because I had limited time. I didn't want to find it there. I wanted to work out which shot would work. And I remember seeing 2 or 3 shots the same, and I just watch them and I go, I think the third one works. Let me put it in with the rest of it. And then go, yeah, but I think that first one, and then just do a quick edit and go, that first one worked better. And that's a discipline I don't see anymore. What I see is people just throwing things together on non-linear editing, and they're like, we'll blend it all in. We'll put some effects in it. We'll put these little things in. And it has its place. It absolutely does. I think one of the great things that technology does, especially with YouTube, is the audience wants content so often that you've got to throw it all together, and you make a mistake. And you might make that mistake 3 or 4 times, but by the 5th time, you're picking up on that and you're refining. Where back in the day, at least for me, you had one chance to make a film at film school, and you had to fight tooth and nail to make that film. I used to break the rules and make 3 films. So I'd make almost a film a semester. We have 3 semesters here, and people used to say to me all the time, they're like, you always deliver. Even if it was shit, you delivered something. And I was like, yeah, because this is my time to do the things that I've always wanted to do. And, just go and do it. There's nothing like it.
Well, that's a lot. That's a big brain dump on Star Wars.
And I'm sure we will talk about Star Wars more.
And I'm sure that there's much more to be said about Star Wars because there's so much history there.
Because we really only talked about the one episode.
Well, and but I think in terms of just the origin of where so much of this came from and what Star Wars had to do with it, I think this was at least a good...
I think we should leave it up to our listeners and viewers. I think they should... they should comment either on Twitter or on Facebook or on Instagram. Do you want more Star Wars talk or less? You all you got to you don't have to say anything else. You just got to drop a
more or less.
More or less. That's just the word more or less, and we'll tally it up. We'll see. We'll see if we can if we are actually listening to the audience. See whether or not people want more talk about our origins and our passion for these Star Wars films.
Good idea, Gil. Good idea.
Okay, so with that said, then check us out on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. Make sure that
on TikTok.
If we get there, yeah. I'm
so old for TikTok. We're there already.
All right. And just make sure you like us and give us a thumbs up. And the more that you guys like us and subscribe to us, then the better rankings we get on the podcast services. So that helps us. So really, just hang out there and give us all the likes and loves and all the subscriptions and whatever else is out there.
And until next time.
I don't have those.
Anyway.
Catch you guys soon.
All right, take care. See you, everybody.